If you've been thinking about launching a podcast and you keep asking yourself, how will this actually make me money? This is for you. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can make your podcast your most powerful sales tool without being just another thing on your to-do list. And I'm going to break down the 3 key ingredients that every single podcast needs to attract clients and sell your offer on autopilot. If we haven't met yet, hi, my name is Pamela Krista, and I help busy women entrepreneurs launch and grow podcasts that actually sells their offer. So here's what I see all the time. Women who are running an online business, who have an amazing offer, who are so passionate about what they do, and they decide that they want to launch a podcast, but they're treating it like a content machine instead of the powerful sales tool that it could be. And so they're launching their podcast, they're doing all of the things, and they're so excited, but also they're overwhelmed, and overall, they're just wondering how their podcast is actually going to make them money. Because believe it or not, there's actually so many ways that you can make money from your podcast. The number one way that I love making money with my podcast, and what I love helping other women do, is making money by selling the things that you already sell. So yes, this means that we're not worrying about sponsorships or ads or even affiliate links, but rather selling something that you created. But here's the truth. If your podcast is not built with the clear strategy, it's really easy to fall into the trap of recording episodes for your podcast that don't actually move the needle. But when your podcast is actually designed from the start to attract your ideal listeners and guide them to your offers, that's when it truly becomes a sales machine right inside the online business that you've already created. Because before you start writing out your podcast episode ideas, before you go and figure out what microphone you should use, and before you go out and research different podcast hosting platforms, we got to start with the bigger picture, and there's a few key things that you got to do first. So let's break it down. Number 1, know your dream podcast listener. You cannot attract your first client on your podcast or your next client on your podcast if you don't know who she is. So it is imperative that you know exactly who you're talking to. This is arguably the most important thing that you can do, because if your podcast is too general and too broad, and if your podcast is talking to everyone, I promise that unfortunately, you are really going to reach next to no one. And I'm not talking about the download numbers. I'm talking about podcasting for dollars and not podcasting for downloads. And I know that that might be hard to hear because a lot of people talk about podcast downloads, and a lot of people associate podcast growth with podcast downloads. But I'm here to break the mold on that, because you do not need millions or even thousands of podcast downloads to book a client. You need the right message targeting the right people with the right offer. And me saying to know your podcast listener might be a little bit hard to hear, because if you're anything like me, you probably have a bunch of ideas. And trust me, if I could, I would probably have about 6 different podcasts on different topics, because there's no way that I could talk about all the things that I'm interested in on one podcast. It just wouldn't go anywhere. Nobody would listen, and it would pretty much be a hobby at that point. And having a podcast with all those different things in it wouldn't really work that well, because we're not here to have a hobby podcast. We're here to actually make money as a small business owner. So if your podcast is too generic and too broad, then you are not building trust with somebody specific. And if you are not building trust with somebody specific, your podcast listeners are not going to feel like you're talking to them. And if your podcast listeners don't feel like you're actually talking to them, then there is a good chance that they're not going to buy your offer. So let me give you a clear example of this. Full disclosure, I have been a podcast strategist and a podcast manager for the past 3 years, and I have always known that my audience was busy moms. I myself am a mom of 5, so it's always been really important to me to reach those listeners through my podcast and through my content. But the truth is, I never really had a person in mind. That has always been a struggle for me. And so what I ended up doing was I actually created created my ideal YouTube viewer and my ideal podcast listener. I went all out. I gave her a name. I gave her a business identity. I know how many kids she has. I know what her goals are. I know what she's trying to do through her podcast. And so now, with every single YouTube video that I create, with every single podcast episode that I record, I'm speaking directly to her. And so her name is Ariel Blue. And yes, she's named after the Little Mermaid. And Ariel is a mom of four, and she sells her offer through her podcast. She is a confidence stylist. So she specifically helps women reorganize their closets, get more confident after having kids, and sells her virtual consultations through her podcast. So the bottom line is, if you know who your podcast listener is, your podcast becomes binge worthy. And trust me, my friend, this is a step that you absolutely don't want to miss. It took me years to implement this, and I wholeheartedly wish that I would have done it sooner. If you want more tips on how to create your ideal podcast listener, make sure that you subscribe to this channel because I'm going to be covering that a lot. It's actually a part of the core framework that I teach. Number 2, recording podcast episodes that actually sell your offer. Now, this one might be the hardest one because I have worked with hundreds of clients over the past few years, and we all love to just create episodes about things that are on our heart, on our mind, myself included. And when you do that, you are missing the opportunity to attach a sale to your podcast episode. This is where most podcasters get stuck. You want to make sure that you're not falling in the trap of recording episode after episode of things that are helpful and valuable, but they don't actually lead anybody to your offer. This part right here is all about your message, what you're saying and how you're saying it, because the right message, it builds trust. And trust is what makes somebody want to buy from you. So many podcasters, and I'm including myself in this category, I have done this as well. We record episodes and we give away tips and value, but never actually connect it to the problem that we solve. I was literally the poster child for this. I talked about what I did, but my episodes didn't lead to that naturally, meaning I wasn't actually connecting the dots between the content in my podcast episodes and how somebody could actually work with me. And that right there, that's the key. We don't want to record and publish podcast episodes to just fill up the feed. We want to record podcast episodes that lead our listener straight to our offer. So let's take my ideal viewer and ideal podcast listener, Ariel Blue, as a clear example of this. So Ariel Blue is a confidence stylist, and she helps moms rediscover their style through virtual closet refreshes and personalized style guides. So on Ariel's podcast, she should not focus her energy and her time on recording episodes about general mom hacks or life as a busy mom of four or even meal planning. Yes, her audience might like that content. They might find it valuable. Some of her audience might actually really love that side of her content. But those episodes aren't going to lead her listeners naturally to the offer that she provides. Instead, Ariel should focus on recording episodes that naturally lead back to her offer so that she can support herself, her family, and her business. Ariel should focus on recording episodes like how to stop dressing for the body that you had 5 years ago, or how to feel confident in your body without buying new clothes, or how to finally define your personal style after becoming a mom. So you see, every single podcast episode that you record, it plants a seed, a belief, a shift, a little nudge toward working with you. I've recently heard this described as taking somebody from point A and making all of your content and all of your podcast episodes about that, moving them towards point B, which is the problem that you solve, and the natural next step, ultimately leading them to working with you. Number 3, having an aligned offer. This is what brings everything full circle. Once you know exactly who you're talking to and you're recording podcast episodes for that specific person, your offer should be the natural next step to solve their problem. Once your podcast is designed and set up to build trust around the offer that you provide as the solution, your podcast will start selling for you without you feeling like you need to do a hard pitch in every single episode. because it should happen naturally. Your listeners should feel like,
Wow, that is exactly what I needed. And this person has this specific thing that's going to help me solve this problem.
at a podcast conference that I attended earlier this year, somebody said something that stuck with me. Your podcast is the vehicle, it is not the destination, meaning our podcast is there, yes, to nurture, yes, to educate, yes, to support and give value. But if your goal is to make money from your podcast with the products and services that you provide, your podcast is just the vehicle. Your offer and what you provide is the destination. And when your podcast as a whole supports that destination, your podcast, it becomes a magnet. It becomes totally binge worthy and it becomes something that works around the clock for you while you're on vacation, while you're sleeping, while you're out playing outside with your kids, while you're on a call with a client, while you're out on a date with your husband. It happens when you're not even expecting it. And trust me, that's the coolest thing when somebody reaches out via email or over on Instagram DMs or wherever, and they're like,
Oh my gosh, your episode was so helpful. And I am so interested in what you're doing. And I'm so excited to work with you.
those are the best messages ever. And that's what happens when you are intentional with your podcast. And your dream listener, they might not buy right away, but if you keep nurturing them and providing podcast episodes that solve that problem, that are naturally leading to what you do and how you can help them, ultimately at some point, they're going to end up working with you. So let's do a quick recap. Number 1, know your dream podcast listener. Number 2, record episodes that actually lead to your offer. And number 3, have an aligned offer that solves the problem that your listener has. Because when even one of these things is missing from your podcast strategy, podcasting can feel like a lot of effort with very little reward. That is exactly why I love what I do. I help women launch their podcast so that they can attract their dream clients and sell their offer right on their podcast. And if you're watching this video and you're like, Pamela, that sounds great, but I need a little bit of help and I would really like support in this, then I would love to work with you. I would love to support you. The link to work with me is in the description of this video down below. And now that we know these 3 key ingredients are what you need to launch a podcast, that is going to help you attract your dream client and generate leads on autopilot. You need to watch my next video. I'm actually going to share with you what you really need to launch a podcast. And trust me, it's not what you think. It's actually what most podcasters miss. And I'm going to make sure that you don't to set you up for success. So click to see the next video and I will see you over there.